Hello?
Hello.
Hello? How are you doing?
Okay. There are a few people on.
I can't see you.
Review. I see Geoff White.
Do you see Roger Brown?
And Roger Brown. I hear here. Roger, you there?
Yes?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, Anthony.
Hi. Okay.
How can I see you?
All right. Geoff, hi. Can you hear me? I don't hear you, Geoff. Yes, I do want to. Can you hear me, Geoff? I can't hear you, Geoff. You can't hear me. You can hear me. Okay. All right.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Okay. Now I hear you.
Okay.
Good.
There's
All right.
thing on my headset. Can you make me a co-host, please?
You are a co-host now. You can test it if you wish to.
Okay. You can see my.
There we are.
PowerPoint.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Good.
Good.
All right. So that's working.
Great. Fantastic. All right.
It looks like people are beginning to sign on. We got 9 participants already.
Can you see me? Hanson, can you see me? I'm Phyllis.
Oh, I do see you. Yep.
I see you.
Okay. Just put yourself on mute, please.
Okay, I will.
Okay. So Geoff, I haven't seen any sign of Paul yet. Have you?
Not yet. I'm sure he'll be along. Paul is true to his time. Usually.
Well, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. feeling
Looking good.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to this. It should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think so. We'll see. See if we have fewer people at the end than when we started.
Well, there 10 people already, and it's 8 minutes to go.
Yeah. It's usually a good sign.
I'll be back in a minute.
Okay. I cannot promise that this presentation won't be interrupted by dogs or cats. That's just the way it goes.
Good. No problem.
My wife has one of the dogs today because she likes to sort of try to sing along. And one of my cats likes playing with all the audio cables and whatnot. So we'll see what happens. Hey, Paul.
There's Paul.
Yeah, it seemed to. We were having trouble the other night with a board meeting that for some reason Paul's Zoom will not allow him to talk over just the internet connection. He has to actually call in.
Oh, so Paul, can you unmute yourself?
He's unmuted, but you can't hear him till he calls in. It's very, very strange.
You can hear him?
No. Paul can hear us.
Okay, he can hear us,
Yes,
but he
Paul can
needs
hear
to
us.
unmute himself.
That's not going to matter. He's gonna call in when it's time for him to give his introduction. That's the only way he can get on audio.
Huh.
No. Very frustrating. Yeah.
Well, I thought he was unmuted for a second. Can I unmute him?
Yeah, you can try. The problem is maybe something with his computer.
There, now he's not muted.
Yeah, but Paul, go ahead and try to talk. You're not going to hear anything.
Paul, can you hear me? Yes, you can. Say something so I can hear you. No? Oh dear.
He'll be on in a minute. We figured this out. Yeah, he has to link his telephone in.
Okay. Now we've got 4 minutes to go here. We've got 17 on.
All right.
Okay, can everyone hear me now?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I don't understand. It's just the way it is.
Okay, great. Now, and I've got 3 minutes to go, and then I will start. My introductory remarks will probably a minute and a half, and then I will call on you, Paul, to take over.
Right, and mine should take approximately the same amount of time. I mean, they didn't come here to see me dressed all funny. They came here to be educated by Geoff. So,
It's not
plus
fun.
I heard he's a pretty decent fiddle player when he applies himself.
It's the qualification there when I apply myself. That's the
Well, it depends how much grog is consumed at the around the campfire.
there's a bell-shaped curve with that, and the law of diminishing returns.
I don't know. The more the guys drink, the better you sound. So hey.
We got to have a grog ration during this. Paul, are you going to be staying on the whole time?
Well, you're performing, right?
Yeah,
So, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I might take my hat off or something, or I might even turn off the camera, but,
Okay.
because I'm sure they don't want to look at me.
They won't. They'll be looking at Jeff. Jeff will be on the screen. Okay. Looks like one more minute. All right, I'm on. Welcome to today's Learn at Lunch. This is a Learn at Lunch that's featuring Geoff White. My name is Hanson Robbins, and I'm chair of the Special Events Committee, and in that capacity, responsible for arranging the Learn at Lunch events. The pandemic has forced us to learn at lunch, to offer Learn at Lunch talks via Zoom without the lunch, but that has turned out to be not all bad. Today's event is an example. We will hear a brilliant musician who is also a scholar present examples of Civil War songs from his home in Western Virginia without having to risk COVID traveling all the way here to Chestertown. Some housekeeping items before we begin. If you haven't done so, please make sure you are muted after you sign on. The mute symbol is on the bottom of your screen or on the edge of the screen. You may unmute yourselves at the question and answer session following this presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, you are in for a real treat today. WC All Notice said that Geoff has been playing music all his life, but that's not quite true. I learned recently that it wasn't until he was 4 years old before he got his first violin. Geoff is a member of a Civil War reenactment regiment known as the U.S. Army Old Guard. The current commander of that regiment, Paul Steer, agreed to introduce Geoff White. Paul, I turn the mic over to you to introduce Geoff.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Steer. I'm the current company commander of one of the companies within the 3rd United States Regular Infantry Regiment. Your presenter today is Geoff White. I've known Geoff since the beginning of 2011, the start of the 150th anniversary event. And at our events, music is always an integral part of what makes these battle reenactments so special to us. What you're going to hear today is the story behind many of these songs. They didn't just magically pop up. The soldiers, when they first came to participate in the American Civil War, were young lads. Of course, they thought they were grown men, but they were young lads between 18 and 21 who had never been away from home before. Army life was very stressful, very different from what they had grown up with. So what they would do is to try to inject humor or try to alleviate the suffering that they were going through in these camps is they would take songs that they knew and they would change the wording to, again, something that might be humorous or something that might be very near and dear. 2 songs that you'll hear today. One is Hard Times Come Again No More, but it has a new title now. And then the other one is the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which actually started off as a religious song, got changed by the soldiers into a very rowdy, humorous song, and then it got changed to, again, what we all know today as the Battle Hymn of the Republic. The impetus of this whole thing was about 8 years ago when we were doing a living history program out at Montpelier. Just a little 5-minute tour. It's called Candlelight Tours, where folks would come out to the camps. And from that one song that we educated the public on, which again was Hard Times Come Again No More, or Bringing in the Sheaves, depending on where you go to church, that was the mustard seed, if you will, the nugget, the acorn that actually grew into what you're going to enjoy today. And without further ado, I'm going to step back and hand everything over to Geoff.
Thank you very much, Paul. I hope you all can hear me. Can you give me a thumbs up? Great. I've shifted over from my headset to my microphone, taken off my headphones, so I will not be able to hear anybody. So if you unmute yourself and you have the kettle on and it's whistling, everybody else will be able to hear it. I'm just going to keep on sawing away. Paul, you have my cell phone number. If we have some sort of technical issue, give me a call. All right. And I'm just going to go right into it. All right. That right there was Soldier's Joy. And that was also known as the Soldier's Joy was the Payday in the Army, a popular tune during the Civil War that you might have heard somebody playing around the campfire there on the fiddle, like I was doing. Thank you all for attending. I'm very pleased to see all your smiling faces. This talk, I have 4 main purposes. The first is that if you know nothing about music from the Civil War, then I'm hoping that I'll educate you about that. If you're coming in here knowing a lot about the music of the Civil War, then maybe I can still offer you something new that you did not know before. If you're coming in here and you know everything about music of the Civil War and there's nothing I can teach you, then I hope I can entertain you. And if you're sitting there or standing there, as the case may be, you know everything about Civil War music and you absolutely refuse to be entertained, then I'm here to play for myself because I like hearing myself play. So I do want to get into one thing before we get started, a little bit of a disclaimer. Some of the lyrics I'm going to show you, the way that this presentation is going to go, it's going to be half lecture, half performance. While I'm performing the songs, I'm going to have my PowerPoint up where you're going to read the lyrics. Okay, I'm not going to bother singing them to you. You can read along or sing along as I'm playing. Some of the lyrics are rather bawdy. Some of them are overtly racist. So, but this is an accurate representation of the songs that were sung during the time of the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. One thing that I have done a great deal of research on is music of Black people and of slaves. Those are 2 separate, distinct things. The music that I've researched during my college time has been mainly on the music that the slaves sang and the music that they played. And any attempt that I make to recreate that, especially in singing, would merely be a caricature, similar to the kind of caricatures that you would have seen back in the Civil War. And that's something I want to avoid. So hopefully you'll still be able to get a sense of the kind of songs that slaves and Black people did play, because there is a lot of crossover here. The main takeaway, though, is that the music of the slaves was very Christian oriented and gospel music. The thing, though, that emerged from all my research was that more than anything else, that kind of music, gospel music, Christian gospel music, was forbidden to the slaves because the Southern slave owners knew that the Bible was interlaced with all sorts of imagery of freedom and, let's say, Moses leading his people to freedom. And they knew that that kind of message would be inherently dangerous to the enslaved population. And so almost categorically, there were a few exceptions, but by and large, Christian gospel music was forbidden to the slaves. The way that they went about singing and performing that music was they had to do it under cover of darkness, in secret, far away from their masters. And the Southern slaves sang a lot of gospel music, not because of the Southern slave owners, but in spite of them. And so that gives the lie to any claim of the Southern aristocracy of the civilizing influence of slavery. So that might be hitting a little between the eyes, but that is nonetheless true as far as slave music goes. So the song I just played to open up was called Soldier's Joy. That was a reel, and it's R-E-E-L. It's real fun. Yeah. A lot of people don't know the difference between reels and jigs, and that's something you're going to learn today. Something like Soldier's Joy has 4 beats per measure. Da 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 da. 1, 2, 3, 4. Da 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 da. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 letters in the word reel. There are 4 beats per measure in a reel. A jig has 3 beats per measure. Da 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 da. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, and so on and so forth. So that is the difference between a reel and a jig. You would often hear a reel played during a dance. You would have a group of people lined up, men on one side, women on the other, and their partners facing across from each other, and you would dance something like the Virginia Reel, and you would hear something like Soldier's Joy being played. You would also hear jigs being played. And there were all sorts of different dances you could do with a jig. And I'm going to play one for you now. So that was the Athol Highlanders. That was a 4-part jig. And oftentimes musicians get a little bored playing the same tune over and over again. So during dances, especially long line dances, where the group has to go through a lot of evolutions to get back to where they started and where dance technically ends, fiddlers and musicians would play several tunes in a row and shift from one tune to another, and that would be called a set. And in the interest of time today, I'm only going to play one jig for you, but that's just something to know about how these dances go. So speaking of dances, you saw Paul there in his officer's uniform. At the military academies at the time of the Civil War, and most of the generals and higher ranking officers came from West Point. One of the pieces of curriculum was dancing. An officer was not only expected to know his profession, he was also expected to pass as a gentleman. And so dancing, doing Virginia reels and quadrilles, that was part of the curriculum. And as you all probably know, West Point was not co-ed at the time when Robert E. Lee and Jackson and Grant were at West Point. And so in order to learn these dances, the cadets would have to take the role, half of them during these dances would have to take the role as the partner and know the woman's side of the dance. And it always just sort of tickles me that to think of a young Robert E. Lee being led around the dance floor. And that actually is something to understand too, is that what we think about as dancing, especially I'm going to play a waltz for you, was not typically done facing your partner, putting your arm around her waist. This was a different time, and that sort of behavior on the dance floor was often frowned upon. That's not to say they didn't do waltzes, but they would have different evolutions where you weren't always like that with your partner. You might have your hands up like so. And I'm going to play a waltz that you might have heard at a dance, and this is called the Spanish waltz. And you'll forgive me, this is the one piece of music I need actual sheet music for. I hope you'll forgive me for that. No, that's just a nice, simple waltz. And actually, in the sheet music I have here, I believe I got it from the Library of Congress. There are instructions for what the partners will do during the dance. So at this point, I'm going to shift over to my PowerPoint. I'm going to try to share my screen here. If this thing will start. There we go. Okay. So there were many songs that crossed the Mason-Dixon line. We had Americans fighting Americans during the Civil War. And one very popular song that was published in 1862 was the Battle Cry of Freedom. And here I'm going to show you both versions. The one that George F. Root wrote was written from the Northern perspective. That is the left-hand one. But it was so popular that it inevitably crossed the Mason-Dixon line, and Southerners say, well, this is a great tune, and we agree in part with the sentiment, but we're going to change the words. So I'm going to play the Battle Cry of Freedom for you, and you can see the difference between the lyrics. and that is the battle cry of freedom. So let me just make sure I'm in tune. Okay. Another tune that was extremely popular during the Civil War, and it was written 7 years before the war began, was Hard Times Come Again No More, by probably one of the most famous composers ever in the history of mankind, Stephen Foster. And this song reminds people to pause in life and understand that they need compassion for those less fortunate than themselves. This song was transformed by members of the 1st Iowa Regiment, and when they started singing about hardtack come again no more. And hardtack, for those who don't know, is a biscuit maybe about yay big. It looks just like a saltine cracker, but it's about that big, and you can break a tooth on it if you're not careful and don't wet it and soften it first. And the soldiers were fed on this and not much else, and so they got sick of it and started singing hardtack come again no more. But it just goes to show that things can always be worse. That when the 1st Iowa Regiment was encamped in this place they called Camp Mush, affectionately, because of the cornmeal that they were fed, called mush, they started to realize that maybe hardtack might have been a good thing to have. And so I'm going to play the song for you, and you can sort of sing along the words as you might like. So it wasn't only the soldiers that changed the words to songs that were popular around the time of the Civil War. This is a song that was, again, written at the start of the Civil War, called Aura Lee by George F. Polton. I believe he wrote the lyrics and W.W. Fosdick wrote the music. Or maybe I have it the other way around. I believe it actually is the other way around. You might recognize this as a tune that Elvis Presley took 100 years later and changed the words to. So I'm going to play that for you now. One thing to remember about the time of the Civil War is you did not have Elvis Presley to sing to you on the radio, on CD, or on your record player or whatever. You would experience music by maybe going to dances, like I've just said. Honestly, the best way to experience music during the 1860s was to do it yourself. You were the entertainment during these times. And so, and this brings up a point. If you have an instrument at home that is maybe sitting there neglected, because maybe you don't feel you're adequate to the task of providing the entertainment, just think back to the time of the 1860s, when whatever you had and whoever you had to play it, that was your entertainment. And that was good enough for them. And by golly, it's good enough for us. So I'm going to switch over a little bit here. I'm going to disconnect the PowerPoint. Oh, excuse me. Going on. Getting ahead of myself there. So people ask me, what is the difference between a violin and a fiddle? I know it's the question that you're dying to ask. The difference between a violin and a fiddle is you don't cry when you spill beer on your fiddle. And that is the technical definition. You look up in Merriam-Webster, you'll find it right there. It really is just a question of how you play it. This, to me, is a fiddle. There are certain things that you can do with a fiddle. I play with steel strings. I have a flatter bridge for all those double stops. But you can play Vivaldi on this, no problem. The interesting thing is, and if you're interested in learning more about this, then let your Learn at Lunch people know that you want Geoff White to give this lecture too, about the secret radical transformation of the violin that happened in the early 1800s. Far more radical than anybody really pays attention to as far as the tuning of the violin and the necks of the violin. You hear about Stradivarius violins. Yeah, their necks have all been altered to be able to play with modern orchestras. We can get into that later. That's beyond the scope of this talk. This fiddle, though, is from the early 1800s because it is a shorter scale. So it is authentic to the time period that I'm portraying. Something else about fiddle playing, I want to talk about accents. There is some growing research suggesting that Appalachian accents, and I will say plural accents, because to understand about the Appalachian Mountains, they had these isolated communities and pockets where accents would develop and mature on their own without any outside influence. There is this growing evidence and research suggesting that Appalachian accents are the closest thing that we have as far as relics of old British accents. So if you want to know how British people talked back in the 1700s, then you look at Appalachian accents. Same thing happens with fiddle playing. Actually, there are different accents. If you look at people like Jake Crack, who is a phenomenal West Virginia fiddler, you can hear, if you listen to him side by side with Donegal fiddling, you can hear those influences plain as day. My accent is a very Cajun influenced accent. My dad, who is actually on the call, went through this phase when I was younger where he listened to Cajun music like nonstop in the car. And that, I think, sank into me subconsciously. And so I do have a very Cajun accent with lots of double stops, and that's playing two strings at the same time instead of just playing two strings at the same time. A lot of slides. Cajun music has a strong backbeat and stutter bowing. So like that's a Cajun affectation there. And it could have gone any other way. I mean, my dad went through a phase where he listened to college fight songs. So, I might have become a trombone player, who knows. But to demonstrate that, my accent, I'm going to play a song that you might recognize from the movie Cold Mountain. And this song is not Ruby with the Eyes That Sparkle. This song is actually Shove That Pig's Foot a Little Further in the Fire. A pretty common kind of name for Appalachian old time tunes. So that's Ruby, no, excuse me, not Ruby with the Eyes That Sparkle. That's Shove That Pig's Foot a Little Further in the Fire. And maybe that'll give you a little bit more insight into that character in Cold Mountain, that he was not composing tunes whole cloth, but was doing a little bit of plagiarism. Yankee Doodle would have been a song that you would have heard both on the battlefield being played by the fifes and drums, as well as on the fiddle. In the interest of time, we're not going to play that. But the Civil War, you have to understand that people were looking back, that we tend to look back at the Civil War as this quaint time. People back in the Civil War were not thinking of themselves in that way. They were looking back further to the time of the Revolution and the time of the War of 1812. And they saw both sides, North and South, saw themselves as the inheritors of a grand patriotic tradition. And so you would have heard Yankee Doodle on both sides, and you would have heard a tune like this called Old 1812. So that's Old 1812. And if you'll excuse me, I need to check my tuning. And it's wonderful that we have these devices that we can check our tuning on. Which is not something they would have had back then. You would have had to tune to one string, one person's string, and everybody else would get in tune with that. And that is one of the reasons for that secret radical evolution of the violin, that tuning was actually much lower in the early 1800s. By the 1860s, it had pretty much gotten to where we understand it now, to where like an A440 for those of you who are musically inclined. So another tune that would have been popular around the campfire, or even played by the fifes and drums, would have been Bonaparte's Retreat. I added that little flourish there so that you might recognize that tune was part of an ad campaign back in the 80s about beef being for dinner. That tune was popular in as much as people thought of Lincoln very much like Bonaparte. And so this song would have been very popular among around Southern campfires, people thinking about Bonaparte's Retreat or about Abraham Lincoln's Retreat. And there is actually a tune called Abe's Retreat. And I'm going to play that for you now. You can hear that's a very modular song in that it goes from an A major to an A minor. Sort of starts off maybe a little bit happy and then is not so happy. And Abe's Retreat being basically about the Battle of First Bull Run, that an ignominious defeat for the Union. So I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint. And talk about one of the most famous songs of the Civil War. And that is the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And you have to cast your gaze backwards a little bit because it began as a camp hymn. And it was, say, brothers, will you meet us? Say, brothers, will you meet us? And so on and so forth. And then it would change to, say, sisters, will you meet us? Or, and so on and so forth. And this was a religious tune. And it became John Brown's Body. There are many, many tunes about John Brown. One of the most famous personages as far as songs go in the Civil War, there are tunes like John Brown's March, John Brown's Dream. In the interest of time, I'm not going to be able to play any of those for you, even though I do very much enjoy those tunes. And one song that the soldiers began singing was John Brown's Body. And so they started singing, John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave. And so on and so forth. I know I promised you I wouldn't sing. I just can't help myself. And And of course, this was sung by Union soldiers because it sings about his soul is marching on. In the fall of 1861, Julia Ward Howe was in Washington, D.C., and was always hearing these soldiers who were encamped in and around D.C. singing that song. And she and her friends thought it had such a wonderful melody, but it needed better words. And it is a bit of an apocryphal legend, but having experienced this sort of thing myself, as far as the creative process for songwriting, I am willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. The story is that Julia Ward Howe woke up one night and had these words in her mind and wrote them down and went back to sleep. And this is what she came up with. And she sent it off to the Atlantic Monthly, as you can see, and they published it as the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And this is the song of an apocalyptic vision of the armies of the Lord marching across the earth to bring freedom to an enslaved people. And I'm going to play this for you now. So that is the story about how the Battle Hymn of the Republic came about. Now, I mentioned bringing freedom to enslaved people. And I also had talked at the beginning of my talk about imitating slaves. That was actually very popular around this time, the minstrel shows of this period, where white people would darken their faces and their skin and perform for audiences. And this was not done in the home. This was done in theaters. And this was considered a very lowbrow form of entertainment. The songs were often very bawdy, overtly racist, as you can tell, and as you'll see from the lyrics I'm going to show you. So here is one such tune that is a minstrel show tune that also talks about events of the Civil War. right. And we're taking a different take on the armies of the Lord and the Jubilee coming. And this song was also known as Year of the Jubilo or Kingdom Coming. And as you can see, it parodies how the slaves might have seen the events of the Civil War. So I mentioned the Lincoln gunboats, and I didn't take a link out of there. I apologize for that. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the Navy. I realized as I was putting this together, I was actually spurred to this realization because in the last week or so, there's been this incredible burgeoning interest in sea shanties. If you follow social media at all of a sudden, sea shanties are all the rage. And I would also be remiss if I didn't mention Paul Steer, who introduced me, is a member of a group in Fredericksburg called the Rappahannock Whalers. So the next time you're in Fredericksburg, Virginia, see if the Rappahannock Whalers are singing. And they're an a cappella sea shanty group, and they're really, really quite good. So we gotta play a sea shanty. I'm not gonna sing it to you. I'm gonna play it for you. So let me see if I can remember how it goes. It's been going through my head, but. You know what? I just don't know if this is coming to me as far as this tune go. This would be a song that American whalers would have sung, and this was recorded by a sailor, and his logbook dates from 1866. So I'm going to give this one a pass. Here's another song, and this is a halyard shanty for hauling on the halyard, and that's the timing that it would take for hauling on the halyard. So maybe while I'm playing this, you can think about this. And this is where research and in many cases in deductive reasoning comes into play, because the Library of Congress has written that this is a song about the North American packet trade between Liverpool and North America, which I really do not believe. This song is, I'm making the claim here that it is about the illegal slave trade. Now, the slave trade was abolished, North American slave trade was abolished in 1808, but all of the clues in this song point to this ship, the people on this ship transporting slaves illegally, talking about the Congo River, the skipper, and you'll see the lyric about the skipper. And I also italicized Black Sheep. There's really no embargo on black sheep crossing the Atlantic. I surmise that it would be blacks she had run by the embargo. And I'm going to play this song for you now. That's Blow Boys Blow. Here's a song that commemorated one of the most famous campaigns during the Civil War and one of the most famous tunes of the Civil War, and I'd be remiss if I didn't play it now, commemorating Sherman's march from Atlanta to the sea. And as I finished up there, that'd be about the tempo where you would see people doing some flat footing. And I've heard people talk about how that's a way that people figured out how to dance without moving around and maybe get across some prohibitions on technically dancing. And flat footing, Southern flat footing, has a lot in common with Irish step dancing. So that is something that came over and was transformed as well across the Atlantic. How are we doing on time? Okay, I'm running way late, and for that I apologize. I do have a piece I sort of show and tell here. I'm not going to have time to play the tune. If time allows at the end, if people really want me to, I can play the tune. One is they not only commemorated the events of the Civil War, they commemorated even the clothing. One song is The Faded Coat of Blue, and obviously about a Union soldier and the coat he wore. And I'll show you here an authentic reproduction of what would be called a fatigue blouse or a sack coat. And this would just be this typical fatigue uniform of a Union soldier. And it's interesting when you think about how these clothes were manufactured, largely hand sewn. They did have sewing machines, of course, but a lot of the details had to be hand sewn. And they didn't have the kind of dyeing techniques or materials that we have now with synthetic dyes. And so you've seen the color of this coat. It's this sort of cerulean blue. If you look here, I think I'm holding that up well enough. You can see how under the collar, where the sun hasn't gotten to it, is a much deeper blue than what the rest of the coat is. So that right there is a good example of a faded coat of blue. Let's see here, am I still showing my screen? So those are the lyrics for it. For some reason, I'm not seeing my Zoom screen. There we go. There we There's the words, the faded coat of blue. All right. Talked about Stephen Foster. Again, one of the most famous composers the world has ever known. He took minstrel songs and transformed them into a more palatable medium, more suitable for parlors and for people sitting at home to play. It's still parodied how people thought slaves talked. You can still see that in the words here, but gone are the body lyrics and the blackface performing. It's a much sweeter, more appropriate, less edgy, more soulful song. So I'm going to play this one for you now, and you can sort of hum along or sing along with the words as you might see fit. And if you look closely, that song ends with a slave being sold. And that actually figures in another Stephen Foster song, "Oh Susanna," is about a slave being sold down the river. I can't talk about minstrel songs without probably talking about the most famous minstrel song of all time. A minstrel song that for some reason became the national anthem of the South, even though it has nothing to do with Southern pride or nationalism. And it was written by a Northerner. And yet still, we have Dixie here. And this is an illustration of what the performers would look like in his minstrels performing the song Dixie. And you'll see that one of its fans actually was Abraham Lincoln, and he did call for it to be played after news had reached Washington of General Lee's surrender. I'm going to play it for you now. So there's Dixie. There's a tradition with fiddle players and bands, especially in the South, that performances end in gospel songs. They give credit where it's due. And I'm going to play this song for you, which was common for the Civil War and actually quite a hit. And I'm going to play this one for you now. All right. And I think I've gone over time. I will beg your indulgence for a few minutes more. I know we've got to get to a Q&A, but I often get asked, I always get asked for this tune. And this song has nothing to do with the Civil War, except that it happened to be featured in a famous documentary. And the tune was actually written about a music camp in upstate New York called Ashokan. And it was written in 1982 by J. Unger. And well, while it has nothing to do with the Civil War, I always get asked for it. So I'm going to go ahead and play it for you now. However, I'm going to do it like a Cajun waltz. So if you're in the waltzing mood, get up and promenade around the house.
that's going to conclude my talk. I know there's a few songs I didn't get to, but now I'm going to open up for a Q&A. Give me 1 second while I put on my headset so that I'm not getting all this room reverb. So just give me 1 minute.
All right. I still see some people are actually on the call, which is nice to see. Not everybody has run. So
Thank you, Jeff. Can you hear me all right?
I can. Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay. Really appreciate your presentation. And I just wanted to act as moderator for anybody who had questions.
I see there's something in the chat here. Well, something about me needing to turn up my mic. Oh well. Are there any questions? No questions?
No questions, I guess. Okay. Well, in that case, let's conclude. And I just thank you so much for giving us a great presentation. And we can sign off.
All right. I'm seeing some
Okay.
hands being clapped.
All
That's
right.
great.
Thank
Thank
everybody.
you. Very good.
Thank you.